The rifle case felt heavier than it should have. Staff Sergeant Kira O'Yelleran stood at the gates of Camp Pendleton Scout Sniper School, and for the first time in 11 years of service, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Not because of the weight in her hands, because of the weight of what that case represented and the promise she had made to a dying man 3 years ago. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know a Marine who carried something heavier than anyone understood. The California sun beat down on the compound as Kira walked toward the main building. She counted 7 men in her peripheral vision, all of them looking, all of them assessing. She had grown used to being measured by eyes that expected her to fail, but there was something different here, something sharper. Scout snipers were trained to evaluate targets in seconds, and right now, she was the target. She noticed the wind first. 11 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting to 14. The flags on the command building confirmed it. Temperatures sitting around 72 degrees, humidity low. Good shooting weather if you knew how to read it. Most people walked through wind without thinking. Kira had not done that since she was 8 years old, when her father first put a rifle in her hands and told her that the air itself would teach her everything she needed to know. Inside the processing building, a lance corporal behind the desk barely looked up from his paperwork. "Name and orders," he said. "Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran. Advanced Instructor Qualification Course." The lance corporal's eyes flicked to her rifle case, then to her face, then back to his screen. He typed something slowly. "You're in Barrack 7. Formation at 0530 tomorrow. Classroom instruction begins at 0700. She took her assigned packet and turned to leave, but something made her pause at the door. Through the window, she could see the main range complex. A cluster of men had gathered near the 1,000-yard line, watching someone shoot. Even from this distance, she could hear the rhythm of controlled fire. Whoever was behind that rifle knew what they were doing. She found Barracks 7 without difficulty. The building was old but clean, the kind of structure that had housed Marines for decades and would house them for decades more. Her room was small. A rack, a desk, a wall locker. Everything a sniper needed and nothing more. Kira set the rifle case on the rack and ran her hand along its surface. The leather was worn smooth from years of handling, first by her father's hands and now by hers. She unlatched the clasps and looked at the weapon inside. An M40A5. To anyone else, it looked like a standard-issue rifle, maybe a little older than most. They would see the scratches on the stock, the slight wear on the bolt handle, and they would assume it was a relic that should have been retired years ago. They would be wrong. The evening chow hall was crowded with candidates and instructors. Kira collected her tray and found an empty table near the back corner where she could watch the room. Old habits. A sniper never sat with their back to a door. She was halfway through her meal when she noticed the young Marine struggling at the far end of the hall. A lance corporal, barely old enough to be here, fumbling with his scope in a way that told her he had been trying to fix the same problem for a while. The men around him were not helping. They were watching him fail. Kira stood and crossed the room. She did not announce herself. She simply sat down across from the young Marine and held out her hand. "Let me see it." The lance corporal looked up, startled. His name tape read FAM. He hesitated, then handed over the scope. Kira turned it in her hands, feeling the mechanism. "Your windage turret is cross-threaded. Someone forced it." She pulled a small tool from her pocket and made 3 precise adjustments. When she handed it back, the turret clicked smoothly into place. Fam stared at the scope like she had performed surgery. "How did you know that?" "Because someone did the same thing to me once." She stood to leave. "Check your zero before you trust it on the range." She was almost back to her table when the voice cut through the noise of the chow hall. Well, looks like the museum sent us a donation." Kira turned. The man approaching her was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like someone who had never been told no in his life. Gunnery sergeant insignia on his collar. A face that belonged on a recruiting poster. Behind him, a small cluster of Marines watched with the eager attention of men who knew entertainment was coming. Gunnery Sergeant Trent Hollister stopped in front of her, his eyes fixed on the rifle case she had left beside her tray. He gestured toward it with his chin. That what I think it is? Depends on what you think it is. He smiled, but did not reach his eyes. Heard we were getting a female candidate for instructor qual. Did not hear she would be bringing her grandfather's rifle. He looked around at his audience, making sure they were watching. Let me guess. Sentimental value? Kira met his gaze and held it. Functional value. Hollister laughed. The men behind him laughed too, a half-second later, the way people laugh when they know they are supposed to. He leaned closer, dropping his voice just enough to make it feel like a secret between them. Word of advice, Staff Sergeant. The long-range qualification event is in 4 days. Best shooters on the West Coast will be here. Colonel's watching. Careers made and broken. He straightened up and spread his hands. Might want to borrow a real rifle before then. That antique is going to embarrass you. He walked away without waiting for a response, his entourage following like shadows. Kira watched him go. She had met men like Hollister before. Men who needed to diminish others to feel tall. Men who saw threat in competence they could not control. What Hollister did not know, what nobody in this building knew yet, was that Kira O'Yelleran had not come here to compete. She had come here to keep a promise. And the rifle he called an antique was the key to everything. 0530 came, with a cold Pacific fog that clung to the hills like something alive. Kira had been awake since 0400, running through her mental preparation the way her father had taught her. Visualization before action. See the day before you live it. She did not visualize what Hollister had planned for her. The PT session started normally enough. Formation runs, standard exercises, the familiar burn of muscles warming for the day ahead. But Kira noticed within the first 10 minutes that something was wrong. Every time the group shifted exercises, Hollister appeared at her side. More reps, Staff Sergeant. Deeper on those squats. You call that a burpee? The other candidates were doing half the work. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. By the time the session ended, Kira's uniform was soaked through and her lungs were burning. She had not shown weakness. She had not complained. She had matched every demand he made and exceeded it. But she saw the look in Hollister's eyes as the formation broke. He was not satisfied. He was frustrated. That was more dangerous. Classroom instruction took place in a building that smelled like decades of gun oil and sweat. Kira took a seat near the back where she could observe the room. 12 candidates total, all vying for limited instructor positions. She was the only woman. She was also the only one who had come from outside the West Coast sniper community. That made her an outsider twice over. Hollister stood at the front of the room, pointer in hand, running through advanced wind reading techniques. He was good, Kira had to admit. His explanations were clear, his examples practical. Whatever else he was, he understood the science of long-range shooting. Then he turned to the room with a smile that made her stomach tighten. Pop quiz, he said. Let us see who has been paying attention. He scanned the candidates slowly, theatrically, before his eyes settled on Kira. Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran, you are at the 1,200-yard line. Wind is coming from your 10 o'clock at 16 miles per hour, gusting to 22. Temperature is 58 degrees, humidity at 63%. Target is stationary. Walk me through your adjustments. The room went quiet. This was not a simple question. He had deliberately loaded it with variables that would trip up anyone who had not spent years doing the calculations in their head. Kira did not hesitate. At 1,200 yards with those conditions, I am looking at approximately 14 MOA of wind drift at the base speed, with an additional 3 to 4 MOA variance for the gusts. Temperature and humidity give me a slight reduction in air density, so I am adding half a minute of elevation. I would dial 11.5 MOA right for the sustained wind and hold an additional 2 for the gust window, releasing only during the lull between gusts. Silence. Hollister's smile flickered, just for a moment. Then it hardened. Textbook answer, he said. Anyone can memorize formulas. He turned back to the board. The question is whether you can apply them when rounds are coming back at you. Some people can do the math. Fewer can do the work. He moved on without acknowledging that she had answered correctly, without acknowledging that her answer had been flawless. During the break, a woman approached Kira outside the classroom. Master Sergeant insignia, weathered face, eyes that had seen more than they would ever tell. Her name tape read Vance. O'Yelleran, the woman said. That name rings a bell. Kira studied her. It might. Vance nodded slowly. My husband served with a gunnery sergeant O'Yelleran back in the day. Good man. Heard he passed a few years back. 3 years, Kira said quietly. Cancer. Something shifted in Vance's expression. Sympathy, but also something else. Recognition. I thought you looked familiar. You have his eyes. She paused, glancing toward the classroom where Hollister was holding court with his followers. He would be proud you were here, but he would also tell you to watch your back. Before Kira could respond, Vance walked away. The afternoon brought range time. Practical exercises at distances from 500 to 800 yards. Kira shot clean, her groupings tight enough to cover with a quarter. But Hollister found ways to dock points. Slow target acquisition, insufficient verbal callouts, position instability. All subjective, all impossible to dispute. By the time the day ended, Kira's evaluation scores put her in the middle of the pack. She knew she had outshot everyone on that range. The scores said otherwise. Back in her barracks room, she finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the day. She sat on her rack and opened the rifle case, lifting the M40 from its bed of foam. The metal was cool against her hands. Familiar, alive in a way that objects are not supposed to be. She ran a cleaning cloth along the barrel, her movements slow and deliberate. This was ritual as much as maintenance. Her father had done this exact thing, in this exact way, thousands of times before passing the knowledge to her. Almost there, Dad, she whispered. Just a little longer. The knock at her door broke the moment. Kira set the rifle down and opened it to find Lance Corporal Pham standing in the hallway, looking like he was not sure he should be there. Staff Sergeant, he said, I wanted to thank you. For yesterday. The scope. Kira leaned against the doorframe. You already thanked me. I know, but I also wanted to warn you. He glanced down the hallway, checking for listeners. Gunnery Sergeant Hollister. He has been riding me since I got here. I thought it was just because I was new, but I have been watching. He picks targets. People he thinks do not belong. Kira said nothing. He has never had a target like you before, Pham continued. Someone who does not break. It is making him worse. I just thought you should know. She was about to respond when a shadow fell across the hallway. Hollister appeared around the corner, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. Pham stiffened like a rabbit caught in headlights. Well, Hollister said, his voice carrying that dangerous smoothness. Look at this. Charity cases helping charity cases. He walked closer, eyes fixed on Kira. I will be careful, Staff Sergeant. The company you keep reflects on your judgment. My judgment is fine, Kira replied evenly. Hollister smiled. Is it? He looked at the open door behind her, at the rifle case visible on the rack. Because from where I stand, you brought a dead man's rifle to a competition you cannot win, and now you are making friends with the weakest candidate in the course. He tilted his head. O'Yelleran. I knew that name was familiar. Kira felt something cold settle in her chest. Your father was Marcus O'Yelleran, Hollister continued. The legend. The ghost. He let the words hang in the air. I heard the stories. Everybody did. But stories are just stories, Staff Sergeant. And legends are just men who died before anyone could prove they were ordinary. He turned and walked away, leaving Kira standing in her doorway with Pham beside her and the weight of her father's legacy pressing down on her shoulders. Hollister knew exactly who she was now, and that changed everything. The Santa Ana winds arrived on the third day like an uninvited enemy. Hot air swept down from the desert, turning the California coast into a shooting nightmare. Crosswinds gusted unpredictably, shifting direction without warning, transforming the range into a test that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. Hollister gathered the candidates at the 1,000-yard line with a smile that told Kira everything she needed to know about what was coming. Live fire evaluation, he announced. Each of you will engage targets at varied distances while I assess your technique, decision-making, and accuracy. He began walking down the line, assigning positions. Martinez, lane 4. Kowalski, lane 7. Beckham, lane 2. The pattern was clear to anyone watching. He was giving the sheltered lanes to his favorites, the positions where the terrain broke the worst of the wind. O'Yelleran, he said when he reached her. Lane 12. Lane 12 sat at the exposed end of the range, directly in the path of the strongest gusts. There was no windbreak, no terrain feature to offer relief. It was the worst position on the line, and everyone knew it. Kira picked up a rifle case and walked to lane 12 without a word. She set up her position with the same methodical precision her father had drilled into her since childhood. Bipod adjusted for the uneven ground. Scope dialed to account for the base wind speed. Body aligned to minimize her profile against the gusts. The wind hit her like a living thing, shoving against her shoulders, trying to push her off target. She breathed through it. In her mind, she heard her father's voice from 15 years ago, patient and steady as he taught her on a windy hillside outside Detroit. Wind is just the earth-breathing baby girl. You learn to breathe with it. Do not fight what you cannot control. Move with it. Wait for the pause between breaths. She waited. The first target appeared at 600 yards. She tracked the wind flags, counted the rhythm of the gusts, and found the lull. Her finger pressed the trigger in the space between heartbeats. Center hit. The second target appeared at 800 yards. More wind now, gusting harder. She adjusted her hold, felt the push against her body, and released the shot at the exact moment the pressure eased. Center hit. By the time she finished the course of fire, Kira had hit every target in conditions that would have defeated most shooters. She could see the other candidates glancing her direction, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been respect. Hollister walked down the line with his clipboard, marking scores. When he reached Kira's lane, he studied her target sheets for a long moment. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Slow acquisition time, he said, marking something on his sheet. Breath control inconsistent on the 700-yard engagement. He looked up at her. Passing score, but barely. The lie was so blatant that Kira almost laughed. Instead, she held his gaze and said nothing. There was no point in arguing. The system was designed to give him the final word, and they both knew it. Behind Hollister, she noticed one of his followers watching the exchange. Sergeant Ezekiel Coburn, a man who laughed at every joke Hollister made and echoed every opinion he expressed. But right now, Coburn was not laughing. His eyes moved from Hollister's clipboard to Kira's target sheet, and something flickered across his face. Doubt. The afternoon brought classroom instruction on deployment protocols, but Kira found it difficult to focus. Her mind kept returning to the range, to the blatant manipulation of her scores, to the quiet complicity of everyone who watched it happen. She had known this would be difficult. She had not expected it to feel so isolating. After the session ended, Master Sergeant Vance intercepted her outside the building. "Walk with me," Vance said. They moved away from the main compound, following a dirt path that wound toward the hills overlooking the range. When they were far enough from listening ears, Vance stopped and turned to face her. "I served with your father for 3 years," Vance said. "Back when this school was smaller and the standards were higher. Marcus O'Yelleran was the finest shooter I ever saw. Not because of his accuracy, though God knows he could thread a needle at 1,000 yards. It was his patience. The man could wait longer than anyone. Wait for the right shot, the right moment, the right opportunity." Kira felt her throat tighten. "That sounds like him." Vance nodded. "He talked about you, you know. His daughter who would not let anyone tell her what she could not do. He said you had his eyes, but you had your mother's fire." She paused. "He would be proud you were here, but he would also want me to tell you the truth. Which is, Hollister has never had anyone challenge his position here. He has been the golden boy for years. Record holder for longest confirmed range hit at Pendleton. Mentored by colonels, promoted ahead of schedule, groomed for greatness." Vance's expression hardened. Men like that do not lose gracefully. They destroy anything that threatens them. You need to watch your back, because he is not going to stop at bad scores. Kira absorbed this in silence. What happened to the others? The ones he targeted before? "Most of them quit," Vance said. "The ones who stayed, he broke. Career-ending evaluations. Transfers to deadened postings. One way or another, he wins. Then why does no one stop him? Because he is smart enough to never leave proof, and the people who could stop him are the same people who created him. Vance put a hand on Kira's shoulder. Your father fought battles like this his whole career. He never backed down, even when it cost him promotions and positions. That is why he was still a gunnery sergeant when he retired. He chose integrity over advancement. Kira understood. Her father could have been a sergeant major if he had played the games. Instead, he had remained true to himself and passed that truth to his daughter. She returned to her barracks room as the sun was setting, her mind heavy with everything Vance had told her. But when she opened her door, she stopped cold. Her gear had been moved. Not obviously, not enough for anyone to claim wrongdoing. But the rifle case was 3 inches to the left of where she had placed it. Her rucksack had been opened and repacked, the contents arranged in a slightly different order. Her notebook sat on the desk at an angle she would never have left it. Someone had been in her room. Someone had touched her things. Nothing was missing. That was not the point. The point was the message. We can reach you anywhere. Kira checked the rifle carefully. Every component was intact, every adjustment exactly as she had left it. They had not tampered with it. They had simply wanted her to know that they could. She sat on her rack in the growing darkness, her father's rifle across her knees. The qualification scores would determine who received instructor positions. Hollister was evaluating her. The system was rigged against her, and now they were invading her space, trying to shake her confidence. She could leave. No one would blame her. She could request a transfer, cite irreconcilable differences, walk away with her dignity intact. It would be the smart move, the safe move. But Marcus O'Yelleran had not raised his daughter to take the safe move. Kira looked down at the rifle in her hands, at the scratches, and where that told the story of a man who had never surrendered to anything. I'm not leaving, Dad, she whispered into the darkness. No matter what he does. The stock exercise began before dawn, when the hills were still wrapped in darkness, and the only sound was the distant crash of waves against the Pendleton coastline. 12 candidates spread across a mile of rugged terrain, each tasked with approaching a designated observation point without being detected. It was the purest test of a sniper's craft. Patience, concealment, reading the land itself. Kira had built her ghillie suit over 3 days, weaving local vegetation into the fabric until she became indistinguishable from the California scrubland. She moved through the darkness in increments measured in inches, timing her advances to the rhythm of the wind and the movement of shadows. By 0700, she had covered 400 yards without detection. Her target observation point sat on a ridgeline ahead, manned by Hollister and another instructor with binoculars and spotting scopes. She could see them scanning the terrain, searching for any sign of the approaching candidates. At 0742, she reached her final firing position, 200 yards from the observers, concealed in a depression that broke her outline against the hillside. She settled the rifle into position, aligned her scope on the target, and waited for the signal to simulate her shot. The radio crackled. Candidate 7, you are detected. Stand and identify. Kira did not move. Candidate 7 was not her number, but the next words froze her blood. Candidate 12, Hollister's voice came through. Detected at 400 yards. Stood too fast at the ravine crossing. Stand and identify. She had not stood at the ravine crossing. She had low-crawled through it on her belly, moving slower than the grass itself. Kira stood, revealing her position, and began the walk of shame toward the observation point. When she arrived, Hollister was waiting with his clipboard and his smile. Saw you clear as day, he said. Should have been more patient. She held his gaze. At what time did you detect movement at the ravine? Hollister's smile flickered. 0712. Saw grass moving against the wind pattern. The grass was not moving against any pattern, Kira replied evenly. I was stationary at 0712. I did not begin crossing the ravine until 0724. For a moment, something dangerous flashed in Hollister's eyes. Are you calling me a liar, Staff Sergeant? I am stating facts, Gunnery Sergeant. The other instructor shifted uncomfortably. Hollister's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, another candidate emerged from the brush 50 yards away. Lance Corporal Pham, his ghillie suit disheveled, his face flushed with exertion and failure. He had been detected legitimately, his movement too fast, his concealment inadequate. Hollister turned away from Kira like she had ceased to exist. Well, look who decided to join us. He walked toward Pham with the slow confidence of a predator approaching wounded prey. That was the worst stalk I have seen in 15 years of instruction. You moved like a drunk elephant. You stuck out like a target at a carnival. Pham stood at attention, his eyes fixed forward, absorbing the abuse. What made you think you belonged here? Hollister continued, his voice rising for the benefit of the gathering audience. What made you think you could ever be a scout sniper? You are a waste of training resources. You are an embarrassment to this course. You are exactly the kind of weak, incompetent liability that gets real Marines killed in combat. Kira watched Pham's face, watched the way his shoulders began to curl inward, the way the light was dying in his eyes. She had seen that look before, on young soldiers who were being broken, on her father's face in his final months, when the cancer was winning and he knew it. Something inside her snapped. He adjusted for terrain shadow, Kira said, her voice cutting through Hollister's tirade. At the 400-yard mark, he altered his approach to use the hillside's shadow pattern for concealment. That was the right tactical call. Hollister turned slowly, disbelief written across his features. Excuse me? His detection was not caused by poor technique. It was caused by your observer position being compromised. Kira pointed to the ridge where Hollister had been stationed. You moved at 0847. I saw the grass shift from my position. You gave away the observation point, which allowed the terrain to be read. Any candidate watching carefully would have seen it. Silence descended on the hillside, the kind of silence that comes before violence or revelation. Hollister's mask crumbled. For one raw moment, his face showed nothing but pure rage. His hands clenched at his sides. His body coiled like he was about to strike. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. The smile returned, colder than before. Defending the weak does not make you strong, Staff Sergeant. It makes you a target. He turned to address the assembled candidates. Exercise concluded. Report back to the classroom for debrief. The candidates began filtering back toward the main compound. None of them looked at Kira. None of them walked near her. She had challenged an instructor publicly and in the mathematics of military politics that made her radioactive. The afternoon passed in isolation. In the classroom, empty seats surrounded her. In the chow hall, conversations died when she approached. She had become a pariah in a single morning, and everyone was making sure Hollister saw their loyalty. She was returning to her barracks when footsteps fell in beside her. Sergeant Coburn, Hollister's shadow, matching her pace with an expression she could not read. He is scared of you, Coburn said quietly, his eyes fixed straight ahead. I have served with him for 4 years. I have never seen him scare before. Before Kira could respond, Coburn veered away and disappeared around a corner, leaving her alone with words that felt like a key to a lock she had not known existed. That evening, Master Sergeant Vance found her cleaning her rifle in the empty common room. Thought you should know, Vance said, settling into the chair across from her. Colonel Isaiah Drummond is arriving tomorrow for the long-range qualification event. He comes every year to observe the candidates. Kira kept her hands moving over the rifle. The name meant nothing to her. Vance watched her for a moment. Drummond served with your father. They were close back in the day. He was at the funeral. Tall man, stood in the back, left before the reception. Kira's hands went still. She remembered that man. She had wondered who he was. He does not know you are here, Vance continued, but he will tomorrow. And unlike Hollister, Isaiah Drummond actually cares about what is right. She stood to leave, then paused. Whatever you are planning, Staff Sergeant, you might want to plan it for when the colonel is watching. After Vance left, Kira sat in the darkness with her father's rifle and the knowledge that everything was about to change. In his quarters across the compound, Gunnery Sergeant Trent Hollister stood before his mirror, practicing the smile he would wear when Colonel Drummond arrived. He adjusted his uniform, rehearsed his greeting, imagined the commendation that would come when he delivered another successful qualification cycle. But his hands were shaking. And no matter how many times he practiced, he could not get the smile to reach his eyes. Long-range qualification day 1 began with cloudless skies and steady winds, the kind of conditions that should have made shooting straightforward. Kira stood at the 500-yard line with 11 other candidates, her father's rifle steady in her hands, and told herself that today would be different. It was not different. Her first shot, at 500 yards, punched through the center of the target. Her second followed a quarter inch to the left. Her third completed a grouping tight enough to cover with a dime. She moved to the 600-yard line and repeated the performance. 700, 800. At every distance, her shooting was flawless. But every time Hollister approached with his clipboard, he found something wrong. Stance instability on the 500-yard engagement, he announced, marking his sheet. Breath control, timing inconsistent at 600. Trigger reset hesitation at 700. The words were meaningless. Technical-sounding phrases designed to justify predetermined scores. There was no instability. There was no hesitation. There was only a man with a clipboard and the power to destroy her with nothing but a pen. By midday, the cumulative damage became clear. Kira found a quiet spot behind the equipment shed and reviewed her score sheet. The numbers stared back at her like a death sentence. She was 6 points below the qualification threshold. 6 points that had been stolen from her through subjective evaluations and manufactured flaws. If nothing changed, she would fail. Not because she could not shoot, because the system had decided she would not be allowed to succeed. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to find Lance Corporal Pham standing before her, his own score sheet crumpled in his hands. His eyes were red, his jaw tight with the effort of holding back emotions that wanted to break free. "They do not want us here," Pham said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have made that clear. Every score, every evaluation, every word out of their mouths. We are not supposed to be here, and they are making sure we know it." Kira said nothing. There was nothing to say. Pham looked down at his crumpled paper. "I am withdrawing. Tonight. I will request a transfer, go back to my unit, pretend this never happened." He met her eyes. "You should do the same, Staff Sergeant. Before they break you too." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with her score sheet and the weight of everything that was pressing down on her. For the first time since arriving at Pendleton, Kira allowed herself to consider surrender. She could leave, request a transfer, cite professional differences, walk away with her record intact. No one would blame her. Everyone who had watched the past few days knew what was happening. They would understand. They might even respect her for refusing to play a rigged game. She looked down at her father's rifle, resting across her knees. The wood was warm from the California sun, the metal smooth beneath her fingers. How many times had he held this weapon? How many hours had he spent teaching her to use it, not just as a tool, but as an extension of herself? The last time she had seen him alive, she was about to deploy. He had been thin by then, the cancer eating away at the man she remembered. But his eyes were still sharp, still fierce, still full of the fire that had never burned out no matter what the world threw at him. "That rifle has got more in it than anyone knows," he had told her, pressing it into her hands. "Same as you, baby girl. Same as you." She had not understood then. She was beginning to understand now. Kira closed her eyes and let herself feel the weight of the moment. The exhaustion, the isolation, the systematic destruction of everything she had worked for. It would be so easy to quit, so easy to walk away. But then she heard laughter. She opened her eyes and looked toward the main compound. Through the gap between buildings, she could see Hollister holding court near the instructor's quarters. His followers surrounded him, laughing at something he had said. His voice carried across the distance, fragments of words reaching her ears, weeding out the unqualified. Standards have to mean something. Cannot let sentiment compromise the program. He was celebrating. He thought he had won. Something shifted inside Kira. Something that had been bending under the pressure suddenly snapped rigid. This was not about her anymore. It was not about her father, or his rifle, or the promise she had made. This was about every candidate Hollister had broken. Every career he had ended. Every person who had walked away because fighting a rigged system seemed impossible. Someone had to stand. Someone had to show that the system could be beaten, and she knew exactly how to do it. That evening, Kira walked into the administrative building and requested a meeting with the chief instructor. She was shown into his office 10 minutes later, facing a weathered master gunnery sergeant named Caldwell, who looked at her with the tired eyes of a man who had seen too many candidates break. "Staff Sergeant O'Yellerin," he said, "I have been watching your scores. Rough qualifications so far." "Yes, Master Gunnery Sergeant," Kira replied. "That is why I am here." Caldwell leaned back in his chair. "If you are here to file a complaint about Gunnery Sergeant Hollister's evaluations, I should tell you that subjective assessments are within instructor discretion. There is nothing I can do about scoring you disagree with." "I am not here to complain," Kira said. "I am here to ask about the long-range competition rules." Caldwell's expression shifted. Curiosity replaced resignation. "What about them? The 2,000-yard line. Is it still open for qualification attempts?" Silence filled the office. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. "The 2,000-yard line," he repeated slowly. "No one in Pendleton's history has qualified with a hit at that distance. Not under standard conditions. It is considered theoretical." Kira held his gaze. "The rules say any issued rifle is permitted. The M40A5 is issued." Caldwell looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Your rifle is not rated for that distance. The ballistics alone make it nearly impossible. Add in wind, temperature variance, Coriolis effect, and you're talking about a shot that most people would not even attempt." "I'm not most people," Kira said quietly. "And that rifle is not what everyone thinks it is." Caldwell studied her for another long moment. Then, slowly he nodded. "The line is open," he said. "Colonel Drummond will be observing tomorrow. If you want to attempt the impossible in front of the most decorated officer on the West Coast, that is your choice." He leaned forward. "But understand this, Staff Sergeant. You miss that shot, and Hollister will make sure everyone remembers it for the rest of your career." Kira stood and headed for the door. Then she turned back. "Then I will not miss." The news spread through the compound like wildfire. By 0600 the next morning, every candidate, every instructor, and every support staff member at Camp Pendleton Scout Sniper School knew that Staff Sergeant O'Yellerin had requested to attempt the 2,000-yard line. Most of them thought she had lost her mind. Kira ignored the whispers and the stares as she walked toward the range. She had spent the night calculating, running numbers through her head until they became as familiar as breathing. Wind drift at that distance. Bullet drop. Time of flight. The mathematics of impossibility. She was reviewing her mental calculations when Master Sergeant Vance intercepted her near the equipment shed. "We need to talk," Vance said. "Now." They walked to a secluded spot behind the armory, out of sight and earshot from the gathering crowd. Vance's expression was different than before. There was urgency in her eyes, something that looked almost like excitement. "I heard about your request," Vance said. "The 2,000-yard line. Everyone is saying you have lost your mind, that your rifle cannot make that shot. Kia waits it. They are wrong," Vance continued. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed with age. "Your father gave me this 12 years ago. Made me promise to hold on to it until the right moment." She pressed it into Kira's hands. "I think this is the moment." Kira unfolded the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper covered in her father's handwriting. Diagrams, calculations, specifications. Her eyes moved across the page, and with each line she read, the world shifted beneath her feet. The rifle was not an antique. It had never been an antique. "Your father was more than a sniper," Vance explained quietly. "He was an engineer, a visionary. He spent 15 years modifying that rifle in ways the Marine Corps never officially adopted. The barrel rifling is tweaked for subsonic stabilization at extreme ranges. The stock harmonics are tuned to reduce oscillation during sustained holds. The trigger brake is calculated to the gram for consistency." Kira stared at the specifications. Everything she thought she knew about her father's rifle was wrong. He believed that platform could reach distances they said were impossible, Vance continued. But he never got to prove it. The cancer came before he had the chance. She paused. "He told me that if you ever came through this school, I should give you that letter. He said you would know when you needed it." Kira's hands trembled as she held the paper. Her father had known. Somehow, impossibly, he had known that this moment would come. He had spent years preparing for it, engineering a weapon capable of achieving what no one believed could be achieved. And he had trusted her to finish what he started. Why did he never tell me? Kira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vance smiled sadly. Because he wanted you to earn your place first. He did not want you to rely on his work. He wanted you to become the shooter who deserved to use it. She nodded toward the range. I think you have become that shooter, Staff Sergeant. Kira folded the letter carefully and placed it in her breast pocket, close to her heart. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Kira retrieved her rifle and began the meticulous process of verification. Every component checked, every adjustment confirmed. She understood now why the rifle had always felt different in her hands. It was not just her father's weapon. It was his masterpiece. By noon, the crowd at the range had grown larger than any qualification event in recent memory. Word had spread beyond the school. Officers from other commands had arrived. Training was suspended so everyone could watch. Colonel Isaiah Drummond arrived at 12:30, his presence parting the crowd like a blade. He was taller than Kira remembered from the funeral, his bearing ramrod straight, his eyes sweeping the scene with the calm assessment of a man who had commanded warriors for decades. Their eyes met across the range, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Memory. He had known her father. He had stood at the back of the funeral and left before anyone could speak to him. Now he would watch her attempt the impossible. Hollister emerged from the instructor's building, his entourage trailing behind him. He surveyed the gathering crowd with barely concealed amusement, then made his way toward Kira's position. So, it is true, he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. You are actually going to try this. He shook his head with theatrical pity. I have to admire the commitment, Staff Sergeant. Most people, when they realize they are beaten, they just quit quietly. But you? You want to go out in a blaze of glory. Kira continued checking her equipment without looking up. Hollister leaned closer, dropping his voice. That museum piece of yours is not rated for 2,000 yards. The ballistics do not work. You're going to stand up there in front of a colonel, in front of this entire school, and you're going to miss. Badly. He smiled. And I'm going to enjoy every second of it. Kira finally met his eyes. Then you should pay attention, Gunnery Sergeant. You might learn something. Hollister's smile faltered for just a moment. Then he laughed, shaking his head as he walked away. This I have to see, he called over his shoulder. This I absolutely have to see. Kira watched him go, then returned her attention to the rifle in her hands. She ran her fingers along the stock, feeling the subtle modifications her father had made. Invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. Revolutionary to anyone who did. The crowd continued to grow. The whispers continued to spread. Everyone was waiting for tomorrow, when Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran would either make history or destroy her career in front of the most important audience of her life. But Kira was no longer afraid. She understood now what her father had given her. Not just a rifle. Not just modifications. He had given her years of preparation for a moment he knew would come. A moment when everything would depend on a single shot. She looked up at the distant 2,000-yard marker, shimmering in the afternoon heat like a mirage. Tomorrow, Dad, she whispered. We do this together. Somewhere in the crowd, Colonel Drummond watched the young woman with her father's rifle, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. Day 2 of the long-range qualification dawned with an electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. Colonel Drummond had taken position in the observation tower at 0600, his presence transforming what should have been a routine evaluation into something far more significant. Careers were no longer just being assessed. They were being witnessed by power. Kira felt the weight of every eye as she walked to the firing line for the standard qualification distances. The whispers had evolved overnight. She was no longer just the woman attempting the impossible. She was either a legend in the making or a cautionary tale about hubris. There was no middle ground. What surprised her was Hollister. He intercepted her before she reached her lane, his demeanor completely transformed from the previous days. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like warmth. "Staff Sergeant," he said, extending his hand. "I want to wish you luck today. Really, whatever happens out there, it takes courage to attempt what you are attempting." He smiled broadly. "We are all rooting for you." Kira looked at his outstretched hand, but did not take it. The performance was flawless. The sincerity was absent. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant," she replied, and walked past him to her position. She could feel his eyes on her back, feel the rage simmering beneath his manufactured friendliness. He was adapting, playing to the audience that now included a colonel. But the hatred was still there, coiled and waiting. The standard qualification proceeded without incident. 500 yards, 600, 700, 800. At every distance, Kira shot clean. Perfect groupings. Textbook technique. And for the first time since arriving at Pendleton, her scores reflected her performance. Hollister could not manipulate the evaluations with Colonel Drummond watching. Every shot was witnessed. Every score was verified. The system that had been weaponized against her was suddenly, temporarily, fair. She watched him from the corner of her eye as the qualification progressed. The nervous energy was unmistakable now. His jaw was tight. His movements were jerky. He kept glancing toward the 2,000-yard marker in the distance, as if measuring something he did not want to measure. If she made that shot, his record would mean nothing. The longest confirmed hit at Camp Pendleton would belong to the woman he had tried to destroy. Midway through the morning, Lance Corporal Pham stepped to the 800-yard line. Kira paused her own preparation to watch. The young Marine had withdrawn his request to leave the course. Something had changed in him overnight. His stance was steadier, his breathing more controlled. He took his first shot. Center hit. Second shot. Center hit. Third shot. Half an inch right of center, but still qualifying. When he finished, his score was the highest he had achieved in the entire course. Not exceptional by elite standards, but passing. Solid. The score of a Marine who belonged. Pham found her during the lunch break, his eyes bright with something she had not seen in him before. Confidence. "I did it," he said. "I actually did it." Kira allowed herself a small smile. "You did." He shook his head, still processing his own achievement. "I was ready to quit. I had the paperwork filled out. But then I watched you stand up to him, and I thought if she could do that, maybe I can too." He met her eyes. "You showed me it was possible to fight back." "You showed yourself," Kira replied. "I just reminded you that you could." Pham nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, the 2,000-yard shot." He paused. "I will be watching. We all will." The afternoon brought the Santa Ana winds back with a vengeance. Gusts swept across the range, stronger than the previous days, creating conditions that would challenge even the most experienced shooters. Kira studied the wind flags, calculating, adjusting her mental models. The conditions for tomorrow would be brutal, perhaps impossible, perhaps perfect. She noticed Hollister approach Colonel Drummond near the observation tower. Their conversation was too distant to hear, but Kira could read body language. Hollister was leaning in, speaking intently, gesturing occasionally toward her position. His expression was earnest, concerned. He was undermining her, poisoning the colonel's perception before tomorrow's attempt. "She is technically competent," she imagined him saying, "but she lacks the composure for instructor duty. Too emotional, too impulsive. The attempt tomorrow is proof of that. A stable candidate would not risk everything on an impossible shot." Colonel Drummond listened without expression. His face revealed nothing. When Hollister finished speaking, the colonel simply nodded once and turned back to observe the range. Hollister walked away looking satisfied. Kira watched the exchange and felt nothing. Whatever Hollister said, whatever seeds of doubt he planted, they would not matter after tomorrow. Word were wind. The shot would be truth. That evening, she sat alone in her barracks room with her father's rifle across her knees and the door locked against the world. The letter Vance had given her was spread on the desk, its specifications illuminated by the harsh overhead light. She ran the calculations again. 2,000 yards. Bullet flight time of approximately 3.2 seconds. Wind drift at current conditions would push the round nearly 18 feet off course. Temperature and humidity would affect air density, requiring elevation adjustments measured in fractions of minutes. The Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, would shift the impact point 2 inches to the right. Most shooters never thought about Coriolis. At 2,000 yards, it was the difference between hit and miss. She adjusted the scope based on her father's specifications, feeling the precision of his modifications in every click. The rifle was ready. The mathematics were solved. The only remaining variable was her. Kira lifted the rifle and pressed her cheek against the stock, feeling the familiar contour of wood that had been shaped by her father's hands. "Tomorrow, Dad," she whispered into the silence. "We do this together." A soft knock interrupted her meditation. She opened the door to find Sergeant Coburn standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Staff Sergeant," he said. He glanced down the corridor, checking for witnesses. "I just wanted to say something." Kira waited. Coburn shifted his weight, struggling with words that did not come easily. "I hope you make it. Tomorrow. I hope you hit that shot and prove everyone wrong." He met her eyes briefly. "Prove him wrong." Before Kira could respond, he turned and walked quickly down the hallway, disappearing around the corner as silently as he had arrived. She closed the door and returned to her rifle, understanding something new about the situation. Hollister's grip on his followers was weakening. The cracks were spreading. Tomorrow would determine whether those cracks became fractures. Day 3 arrived with winds that seemed determined to make the impossible truly impossible. Kira stood at the edge of the range at 0700 and watched the flags snapping violently against their poles. 20 miles per hour sustained, gusting to 35. The kind of conditions that shut down training exercises. The kind of conditions that made experienced shooters shake their heads and wait for better weather. There would be no waiting. Not today. The crowd began gathering before 0800. Word had spread beyond the Scout Sniper School, beyond Camp Pendleton itself. Officers from neighboring commands arrived in dress uniforms. Retired Marines who had heard through the grapevine appeared at the perimeter. Training across the base had been suspended so that anyone who wanted to witness history or catastrophe could attend. By 0900, over 200 people lined the range, the largest audience for a qualification attempt in the school's history. Colonel Drummond took his position in the observation tower at 0915, binoculars hanging from his neck, his expression carved from stone. His presence guaranteed that whatever happened next would be official. Recorded. Belmano. Hollister positioned himself at the front of the crowd, arms crossed over his chest, the smirk already fixed on his face. His followers flanked him like a personal audience, ready to laugh at a signal. Kira walked to the 2,000-yard line at 0930, her father's rifle case in her hands. The crowd parted for her. No one spoke. The only sounds were the wind and the distant crash of Pacific waves. She set down the case and opened it, revealing the M40A5 that everyone had mocked since her arrival. The museum piece. The antique. The wrong gun. Chief Instructor Caldwell approached her position, his weathered face tight with concern. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, "the conditions are worse than forecast. Wind is unpredictable. Gusts are exceeding safe parameters." He paused. "You can postpone. Request a different day. No one would blame you." Kira looked at him steadily. "I did not come here to postpone." Caldwell held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and stepped back to join the observers. She began her setup with the same methodical precision she had practiced since childhood. Bipod extended and planted. Rifle positioned. Scope verified. Every movement deliberate, unhurried, as if the 200 watching eyes did not exist. Hollister's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Wrong gun, sweetheart," he called out, loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "That museum piece will not even reach the target." Laughter rippled through his section of the audience. Nervous laughter, uncertain laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Kira did not look up. She continued her preparations as if he had not spoken. Hollister pushed harder. "Someone get her a real rifle before she embarrasses herself." He spread his hands theatrically. 2,000 yards with an M40? The ballistics do not work. Everyone here knows it. She knows it. This is not courage. This is delusion. More laughter. But less this time. The crowd was beginning to sense something in the air that had nothing to do with wind. Master Sergeant Vance stepped forward from the observer line, her voice sharp as a rifle crack. "Let her work, Gunnery Sergeant." The laughter died instantly. Something in Vance's tone commanded silence in a way that rank alone could not explain. The crowd went still. Kira finished her verification. Scope aligned. Windage calculated. Elevation adjusted according to her father's specifications. She ran through the mathematics one final time. 3.2 seconds of flight. 18 feet of wind drift at current sustained speed, plus variable adjustment for gusts. Coriolis compensation. Temperature and humidity factors. The numbers were locked in her mind like coordinates to a destination only she could see. She took a breath. Then she did something no one expected. She stood up. Not prone, not supported. Standing. A collective gasp moved through the crowd like a wave. 2,000 yards was considered impossible from a prone, supported position. Standing, it was suicide. No stability. No support. Nothing but the shooter's body between the rifle and failure. Hollister's laugh rang out across the range. "She has lost her mind," he announced to anyone listening. "This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect." Standing at 2,000 yards. Someone should be recording this. But Kira was no longer listening to him. She was no longer aware of the crowd, the wind, the weight of 200 stairs. The world had narrowed to a single point of focus. The steel target, shimmering in the distance like a mirage. The rifle in her hands, warm and familiar. The steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She settled into her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart. Weight balanced. The rifle rose to her shoulder like an extension of her own skeleton. The stock pressed against her cheek in the exact position her father had taught her 20 years ago. In the observation tower, Colonel Drummond leaned forward. His binoculars came up slowly, but his eyes were not on the distant target. They were on the woman with the rifle. On her stance. Her grip. The particular way she held her body absolutely still despite the wind try to push her off balance. He had seen that stance before. That exact stance. 25 years ago, on a different range, watching a young gunnery sergeant named Marcus O'Yelleran do things with a rifle that should not have been possible. The colonel's breath caught in his throat. On the firing line, Kira O'Yelleran blocked out the last of the noise. The crowd disappeared. Hollister disappeared. Even the wind became nothing more than data, a variable to be calculated and compensated. There was only her, the rifle, and the target 2,000 yards away. She began to breathe. In, out, finding the rhythm her father had taught her. The pause between heartbeats, the stillness between breaths. Her finger touched the trigger. The world held its breath. The wind screamed across the California hills like something alive and angry. 23 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting higher. The flags along the range snapped and twisted, their patterns chaotic, unpredictable. Kira saw none of it. She had moved beyond seeing. Her body was still, rooted to the earth like stone. The rifle pressed against her shoulder, the stock welded to her cheek, every point of contact precisely where her father had taught her to place it. 2,000 yards. 1.14 miles. A distance so vast that the steel target was barely visible, a tiny rectangle shimmering in the heat mirage like a dream of something solid. The calculations moved through her mind one final time. Wind from the northwest at 23 miles per hour. Gust factor variable. Temperature 68 degrees. Humidity 31%. Elevation adjustment plus 47 minutes of angle. Wind hold 28 minutes right. Coriolis drift 2 inches at this latitude. Bullet flight time 3.2 seconds. In 3.2 seconds, the wind could shift. The gust could spike. 1,000 variables could change in ways she could not predict or control. She released the calculations. Let them dissolve like morning fog. There was nothing left to think. There was only this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. Hollister's voice pierced the silence one last time. "Any day now, sweetheart. Some of us have real work to do." The words reached her ears, but went no further. They were sounds without meaning, vibrations in air that had nothing to do with what was about to happen. She was somewhere else now, somewhere quiet, somewhere her father waited. The crosshairs settled on the target. The wind pushed against her body, tried to move her, trying to disrupt the perfect stillness she had cultivated over 20 years of practice. She let it push. She did not fight. She became part of the wind, part of the landscape, part of the air itself. Her breathing slowed. In, out, in, out. Each breath shallower than the last. Each pause longer, until she found the space between. The natural respiratory pause. The moment when the body is neither inhaling nor exhaling. When the heartbeat creates the smallest possible movement. When stillness becomes absolute. She found her father's voice in that stillness. The memory of his words from 15 years ago, patient and steady, teaching her the secret that separated good shooters from great ones. Breathe with it, baby girl. Do not fight what you cannot control. Her finger tightened on the trigger, not pulling. Ozan. A gradual increase of pressure, so smooth that the break would come as a surprise, eliminating the flinch that ruined so many shots at distance. She whispered into the silence. Breathe with it. The rifle spoke. The recoil pressed against her shoulder. The muzzle rose and settled. The sound of the shot rolled across the range like thunder, echoing off the hills, fading into the distance. And then silence. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Every eye on the range tracked toward the distant target, too far away to see clearly, too far away to know anything until the sound came back. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Clang. The steel sang. A clear, pure note that carried across the range like a bell announcing something holy. The sound of a bullet striking metal at 2,000 yards. No one moved. In the observation tower, Colonel Drummond pressed his binoculars against his eyes, his hands steady despite the impossibility of what he was witnessing. He studied the target for a long moment. Then he lowered the binoculars and spoke, his voice carrying across the silent range with the authority of 30 years of command. Confirmed hit. Center mass. From standing. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Then the crowd erupted. Cheers and shouts and disbelieving exclamations burst from 200 throats at once. Candidates who had avoided her for days were screaming her name. Instructors who had watched in silent complicity were on their feet, applauding. The sound washed over the range like a wave breaking against the shore. But Kira did not move. She did not lower the rifle. She did not acknowledge the crowd. She did not turn to see the expression on Hollister's face. Instead, she worked the bolt. The spent casing ejected, spinning brass in the California sun. A fresh round chambered with a sound like a promise being made. She settled back into her stance. The crowd went quiet again, confusion rippling through the celebration. What was she doing? She had made the shot. She had proven the impossible. Why was she still standing at the line? The answer came 3 seconds later. Clang. The second shot struck the target with the same pure note as the first. Center mass. 2,000 yards. Standing. The crowd's noise died in their throats. This was no longer luck. This was no longer a single miraculous moment that could be attributed to chance or divine intervention. This was something else. Something that defied everything they thought they knew about the limits of rifle and shooter. Kira worked the bolt again. Third round chambered. Third shot released. 3.2 seconds of silence. Clang. 3 consecutive hits at 2,000 yards from a standing position with an M40A5 that everyone had called an antique. 3 shots that rewrote the record books. 3 shots that would be talked about at Camp Pendleton for decades to come. Kira finally lowered the rifle. She turned to face the crowd, her expression calm, her breathing steady. She looked exactly like someone who had just completed a routine qualification exercise, not someone who had just achieved the impossible 3 times in succession. Her eyes found Hollister in the crowd. His face was white, not red with anger, not twisted with denial. White, the color of a man watching his world collapse, watching everything he had built and believed about himself crumble into dust. He had called it the wrong gun. He had called her delusional. He had promised she would embarrass herself in front of the entire school. And now he stood in the wreckage of his own predictions, surrounded by witnesses who would never let him forget this moment. Kira held his gaze for 3 seconds, the same amount of time it had taken her bullets to reach the target. Then she looked away, dismissing him completely, and began packing her rifle. The wrong gun had just made history. The crowd parted like water before a ship's bow as Colonel Drummond descended from the observation tower. His boots struck the packed earth with measured steps, each footfall carrying the weight of 30 years of command. No one spoke. No one moved. The celebration had frozen mid-breath, replaced by the particular silence that surrounds power in motion. Kira stood at the firing line, her father's rifle cradled in her arms, watching the colonel approach. She had seen him only twice before. Once at her father's funeral, a tall figure in the back row who left before the reception. Once across the range yesterday, his expression unreadable as he observed her qualification. Now he was walking toward her with purpose in his stride, and something in his eyes she could not quite identify. He stopped 3 feet away. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then his gaze dropped to the rifle. "May I?" he said. It was not really a question. Kira handed him the weapon. Drummond held the M40A5 with the familiarity of a man who had spent decades with rifles in his hands. He turned it slowly, examining the stock, the barrel, the subtle modifications that were invisible unless you knew what to look for. His fingers traced the custom bedding. His eyes noted the altered trigger assembly. His thumb found the barely perceptible changes to the bolt handle. "This was Marcus's rifle," he said finally. Statement, not question. "Yes, sir. He left it to me." Drummond nodded slowly, still studying the weapon. "I knew your father for 20 years. Served with him in places that do not exist on any official record. He was the finest shooter I ever saw, and I have seen many." He looked up at her. But he was more than a shooter. He was an engineer, a visionary. He spent years on modifications the Corps never officially adopted. Said the brass were too conservative, too unwilling to push boundaries. Kira felt her throat tighten. She had known her father was exceptional. She had not known the full extent of his genius until Vance had given her the letter. Drummond turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying across the range with effortless authority. "What you witnessed today was not luck. It was not a fluke. It was the result of decades of research and development by Gunnery Sergeant Marcus O'Yelleran, executed by his daughter with skill that matches his own." He raised the rifle slightly. "This weapon represents innovations in barrel harmonics, trigger mechanics, and ballistic compensation that exceed current issue specifications. Every modification falls within Marine Corps parameters. Every component is regulation approved. The shots stand. The record stands." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Understanding dawning. The antique they had mocked was actually a prototype. The museum piece was cutting-edge technology hidden in plain sight. Hollister pushed forward through the crowd, his face flushed, his composure cracking. "Sir, with respect, she used a modified weapon. That gives her an unfair advantage. The qualification should be reviewed, the scores examined, the whole situation investigated before any record is certified." Drummond turned to face him with an expression that could have frozen the Pacific. "Modified using techniques available to any armorer with sufficient skill. Every change documented in official Marine Corps technical manuals." He paused. "The rifle is legal. The shots are confirmed. Is there something else, Gunnery Sergeant?" Hollister's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he tried another angle. "Sir, her evaluation scores throughout this course indicate significant deficiencies. Stance instability, breath control issues, slow target acquisition. My assessments have been consistent and documented. Whatever happened today does not erase a pattern of substandard performance." The silence that followed was absolute. Drummond took 3 slow steps toward Hollister until they stood face to face. His voice dropped, but somehow became more audible, the way a blade becomes more dangerous when held still. "I have seen her evaluation scores, Gunnery Sergeant. I have also seen the raw footage from the range cameras. Every distance, every shot, Every qualification exercise since she arrived. He paused to let the words sink in. I have seen everything. The color drained from Hollister's face as the implication became clear. The range cameras recorded everything. Every perfect grouping that had been scored as deficient. Every flawless performance that had been marked down for phantom flaws. Every lie he had written on his clipboard was preserved in digital evidence that could not be disputed or explained away. He was exposed. Completely, irrevocably exposed. But Hollister was not a man who surrendered easily. His survival instinct pushed him to one last desperate attack. Sir, he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. Regardless of shooting ability, Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran is not instructor material. She lacks the presence required to lead. She lacks the authority to command respect. She is technically competent, but temperamentally unsuited for the role she is pursuing. He turned to face Kira directly, drawing himself up to his full height, trying to reclaim the dominance he had wielded over her for days. So people can shoot, he said. Fewer can teach, and fewer still can lead. You might have proven something today, Staff Sergeant, but you have not proven you belong at the front of classroom. The crowd held its breath, waiting for her response. Kira met his gaze without flinching. She had spent days absorbing his attacks, deflecting his sabotage, enduring his cruelty in silence. She had let her shooting speak for her, because words seemed inadequate against the system he had weaponized. But now the system had been exposed. Now the colonel was watching. Now the truth was on her side. Authority is not given by a title, gunnery sergeant, she said, her voice clear and steady. It is earned by competence. Some of us understand that. Some of us have to learn it the hard way. She held his stare for 3 heartbeats. Then she continued, You have spent your career tearing down anyone who threatened your position. You have used your rank to bully, your evaluations to sabotage, your authority to destroy. She gestured toward the crowd, watching in silence. Everyone here has seen it. Everyone here has been afraid to speak. But fear does not make something right, and silence does not make something true. Hollister's face twisted with barely contained rage, but he had no response. No comeback, no clever dismissal that could undo what had just happened. For the first time in his career, Gunnery Sergeant Trent Hollister had nothing to say. Kira turned back to Colonel Drummond and extended her hand for her father's rifle. I believe this belongs to me, sir. Drummond handed it back with something that might have been a smile. Indeed it does, Staff Sergeant. Indeed it does. The official review convened at 1400 hours in the base commander's conference room. Colonel Drummond sat at the head of the table, flanked by the chief instructor and Master Sergeant Vance. Before them lay stacks of evaluation forms, score sheets, and printed frames from range camera footage that told a story no amount of subjective language could obscure. Gunnery Sergeant Hollister stood at attention before them, his dress uniform immaculate, his face carefully blank. But Kira, seated along the wall as a witness, could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. He knew what was coming. They all did. Drummond spread the evaluation forms across the table like evidence at a trial. Over the past 3 qualification cycles, you have evaluated 47 candidates, Gunnery Sergeant. He picked up one sheet, then another. 23 of those candidates were female or from minority backgrounds. He looked up. Every single one of them received lower scores than their performance warranted. Hollister's jaw tightened. Sir, my evaluations were based on observable criteria. Subjective assessment is within instructor discretion, as established by training command protocols. Drummond nodded slowly. Subjective assessment is within discretion. He picked up a photograph, a still frame from the range cameras. This is Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran's grouping at the 800-yard line on day 1. Center mass, quarter-inch spread. He set it beside a score sheet. Your evaluation marked her down 4, and I quote, stance instability and breath control inconsistency. He looked at Hollister with eyes that could have cut steel. Would you care to explain how a shooter with stance instability produces a grouping that tight? The silence stretched. Hollister's composure cracked just slightly. Sir, I was maintaining standards. The scores reflected my professional judgment at the time. Your professional judgment, Drummond repeated. He set down another photograph. This is Lance Corporal Pham's stock exercise. Your notes indicate he was detected at 400 yards due to excessive movement. He tapped the image. The camera shows him stationary in a drainage ditch at 400 yards for 11 consecutive minutes. No movement. None. More silence. Heavier this time. I am recommending a full audit of the past 3 qualification cycles, Drummond continued. Every candidate you evaluated will have their scores reviewed against camera footage. Every subjective deduction will be examined. He stood, and the weight of his authority filled the room. You will be reassigned pending the investigation. Your access to training facilities is suspended effective immediately. Your instructor certification is under review. Hollister's face went pale, then flushed with barely controlled rage. Sir, I have served this school for 6 years. I hold the distance record. I have trained more snipers than anyone currently on staff. You held the distance record, Drummond corrected quietly. As of this morning, that record belongs to Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran. He gathered the papers before him. You are dismissed, Gunnery Sergeant. Report to personnel for reassignment orders. For a moment, Hollister did not move. His eyes swept the room, searching for allies, finding none. Even Sergeant Coburn, seated in the corner, refused to meet his gaze. Finally, he drew himself up straight. I was maintaining standards, sir. Nothing personal. Kira spoke from her seat along the wall. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. That is the problem, Gunnery Sergeant. You made it personal for everyone you dismissed. Every candidate you broke. Every career you ended. Every person who walked away believing they were not good enough because you told them they were not. She stood to face him directly. You did not maintain standards. You weaponized them. There's a difference. Hollister stared at her, with hatred burning in his eyes. But there was nothing he could say. No defense that would hold against the evidence stacked on the table. No attack that would land with Colonel Drummond watching. 2 military police officers appeared at the door to escort him out. As Hollister passed Kira's position, he leaned close enough to whisper, "This is not over." Kira met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, it is." And then he was gone. The room seemed to exhale after his departure. Drummond dismissed the formal proceedings, and the officers began filing out. Kira remained seated, processing everything that had just happened. The victory felt strange, hollow in some ways, full in others. She became aware of someone standing beside her and looked up to find Lance Corporal Pham, his face bright with an emotion she had rarely seen in him during their time at the school. "I passed," he said. "Full qualification. I'm going to be a scout sniper." Kira allowed herself a small smile. "You earned it." Pham shook his head. "I would have quit. After that stock exercise, after everything he said, I had the paperwork ready." He met her eyes. "You showed me that standing up was possible, that the system could be beaten." "The system was not beaten," Kira replied. "One man was held accountable. The system still exists." She put a hand on his shoulder. "But now you are part of it. Make it better than you found it." Pham nodded slowly, understanding. "I will try." He left, and Kira found herself alone in the conference room. Almost alone. Master Sergeant Vance appeared in the doorway, holding something in her hands. She crossed the room and sat down beside Kira. "I have something else for you," Vance said. She held out a photograph, old and slightly faded, preserved in a protective sleeve. "I've been holding on to this even longer than the letter." Kira took the photograph and felt her breath catch. It showed a young Marine at the exact spot where she had taken her shot this morning. Same range, same firing line, same hills in the background. The Marine was holding an M40 rifle, his stance perfect, his eyes focused on something in the distance. Her father, 30 years younger, alive. "He took a 1,500-yard shot from that spot," Vance said softly. "Back when 1,500 was considered impossible. Nailed on the first try, just like you did." She paused. "He told me afterward that someday, someone would go further, would prove that the rifle could do things nobody believed. He said he knew exactly who that person would be." Kira's vision blurred. She blinked, and tears tracked down her cheeks. The first tears she had allowed herself since his funeral 3 years ago. He planned this, she said, her voice thick. All of it. Vance nodded. Marcus O'Yelleran never did anything by accident. He knew you would end up here eventually. He knew you would face someone like Hollister. And he made sure you would have everything you needed to win. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. He will be proud of you, Kira. Not because you broke his record, because you became the person who could. Alone in the conference room, Kira held the photograph of her father and let the grief and pride wash through her together. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of his death like a stone in her chest. For 3 years, she had pushed forward because stopping meant feeling. Now, she let herself feel it all. He was gone. He would always be gone. But his legacy lived on in the rifle that had just made history, and in the daughter who had carried it further than he ever could. I did it, Dad, she whispered to the photograph. We did it together. 3 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Kira O'Yelleran stood before a new class of Scout sniper candidates and saw herself in their eyes. The uncertainty, the determination, the desperate hope that they belonged in a world that would spend every day trying to convince them they did not. 14 candidates this cycle. 4 women, 3 first-generation Marines, all of them looking at the instructor patch on her shoulder like it meant something. She let them look. I'm Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran, she said. I am here to help you become the best shooters in the Marine Corps. Not the best you can be. The best, period. She paused, letting the words settle. This course will break some of you. Not because you are weak. Because becoming exceptional requires breaking through every limit you thought you had. My job is to make sure those limits are real, not invented by someone who does not want you here. A hand went up in the back row. Young Marine, barely 20, eyes bright with the particular curiosity of someone who had heard stories. Staff Sergeant, is it true you hit 2,000 yards standing? With an M40? Murmurs rippled through the group. They had all heard the rumors. The impossible shot. The record that rewrote everything the Scout sniper community thought they knew about distance. Kira considered the question. She could have told them about the modifications, about her father's genius, about the years of preparation that made that moment possible. Instead, she gave him the truth that mattered. I hit 2,000 yards with the right preparation, the right patience, and the right training, she said. Those are things I can teach you. The rifle does not matter as much as what is behind it. She gestured toward the range stretching out before them. Any weapon is just metal and would until someone with discipline picks it up. Your job is to become the person who makes the impossible possible. My job is to show you how. The young Marine nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Understanding replacing awe. In the observation tower overlooking the range, Colonel Drummond watched the exchange through his binoculars. He had come to observe the new cycle's first day, but really he had come to see her, to confirm what he had suspected since the moment he watched her take that standing shot. She was her father's daughter, not just in skill but in spirit. Marcus O'Yelleran had spent his career fighting systems that tried to limit what was possible. Now his daughter would spend hers building something better. Drummond lowered his binoculars and allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the future in capable hands. On the range, Kira ran the candidates through basic positioning and breath control. She was exacting in her standards, but patient in her instruction. When someone struggled, she did not humiliate them. She adjusted their form, explained the mechanics, and gave them room to fail safely. Lance Corporal Pham moved among the candidates as her assistant instructor, his own journey from near failure to qualification giving him a perspective that resonated with those who doubted themselves. He caught Kira's eye across the firing line and nodded. They did not need words. They understood each other. During the midday break, Kira walked alone to the 2,000-yard marker. The steel target still stood where it had been that morning 3 weeks ago, the morning that changed everything. She ran her hand along the wooden post that marked the firing line. Someone had carved something into the wood. Fresh cuts, the letters still pale against the weathered surface. SSGTK O'Yelleran. First standing. She had not asked for this, had not requested any memorial or recognition. But someone had decided that what happened here deserved to be remembered. that the moment when the impossible became possible should be marked for everyone who came after. She traced the letters with her fingertip. Her father would have said something humble, would have deflected the attention, pointed to the rifle, credited the mathematics. But her father was gone, and Kira was learning that sometimes you had to accept what you had earned. She stood there for a long moment, looking out at the distant hills, feeling the wind that had tried so hard to push her off target. The same wind was blowing today, gentler now, as if it had made its peace with what she had accomplished. That evening, after the candidates had been dismissed and the range had fallen quiet, Kira sat in her new quarters and cleaned her father's rifle. The ritual was the same as it had always been: bore brush and cleaning rod, solvent and oil. The careful attention to every component that kept the weapon functioning at its peak. But something was different now. The weight she had carried since his death had shifted. Not gone, but transformed. The grief was still there, would always be there. But it was no longer a stone dragging her down. It was fuel pushing her forward. She held the rifle up to the light, examining the barrel her father had modified with such precision. The stock he had tuned to eliminate every vibration. The trigger he had adjusted to break at the exact pressure that matched his daughter's hands. He had built this weapon for her, had known, somehow, that she would need it, that a moment would come when everything depended on what this rifle could do. "We did it," Dad, she said softly, just like he knew he would. She set the rifle in its case and picked up the photograph Vance had given her. Father and daughter, separated by 30 years, connected by precision, patience, and the courage to attempt what others called impossible. Tomorrow she would return to the range, would teach another generation of snipers that limits were meant to be exceeded, would build a program where talent mattered more than politics, where competence trumped cruelty, where every candidate got the fair evaluation they deserved. Tomorrow she would continue what her father started. The next morning, Staff Sergeant Kira O'Yelleran walked to the range as the sun rose over Camp Pendleton, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. She had proven what her rifle could do. She had proven what she could do. Now it was time to show others what they could become. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, or tell us about a time when someone underestimated what you could accomplish. Your story might be the one that inspires someone else to take their own impossible shot.